Well, we're back here on Cambridge Inside Out. All right. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the matters that came up at last night's city council meeting, sort of the third of the items. So, the special meeting for the manager's contract. There was a committee meeting about drones, and then the regular city council meeting. There was some interesting items in there. Uh, but right now there's actually zero zoning petitions for the city, which is a rarity. Um, so it's more like people, especially in a municipal election year, people are probably already dreaming up something that they can submit so that they can either take credit for or rally around or whatever, because that's what people do during municipal election years, is you either put in things like ballot questions or you put in zoning legislation that try and force a beneficial vote somewhere close to election day. And it's kind of how that playbook has gone for many, many, many years. So there were some things that were kind of, in my view, at least sort of performative. I don't, I won't, uh, well, I mean, let me just pop over here just for a second here, just to just sort of highlight a few of these ones right in here. So one of the items that was certainly subject to a lot of um, uh, entries during the public comment period had to do with order number 2, that the city council go on record reaffirming the city, Cambridge is a sanctuary city, not only for immigrants, but also for all marginalized communities, including transgender and non-binary individuals. So that was originally submitted by Mayor Simmons, Vice Mayor McGovern, and Councilor Sabrina Wheeler. I'll just say that it was later 3 other councilors added in. I haven't actually gone through the full recording of the meeting yet. Usually I would have done it by now, but I didn't really get a chance there. As I say, I've never been a big fan of a lot of the sanctuary city stuff anyway, because I think it's just more virtue signaling than it is practical than anything else. And of course, there are certain aspects that are kind of real. I think, was it Mayor Wu from Boston is probably going to get cooked in front of a United States congressional hearing. Is it tomorrow? I think it might even be tomorrow, unless it was today, because of the declaration of yourself as a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state. So in Cambridge now, it's just more like adding, whichever groups want to be added in this year. I guess I'm kind of glad they at least said in other marginalized communities, because there are a lot of, there's the political marginalized communities, and then there are other people who are pretty marginalized. Like if you're, families with children, you probably have a lot harder time finding housing in Cambridge than does a person who's from one of their listed, victims, right? Um, or also if you're a disabled person. I mean, is Cambridge a welcoming city for disabled people? I think in some ways it is, but that may not be true for access to housing. What about elderly people? And now that I'm quickly becoming one of them, I mean, I've secured my future here, thankfully. But if you were a person who was 75, 80 years old and you didn't have a big, big bucket of cash and you're looking to find housing here, you probably have a lot tougher row to hoe, than somebody, who fits into one of the other categories that they list here. So I never particularly liked these declarations where they start making lists of who the people in need or who the people who are endangered are, because the list could you can always add more to it. And and if you're, I mean, let me add another one. What if you're a person who has a criminal record? you know are we a welcoming city to people who are, reformed themselves and they're wonderful people, but they just happen to have a criminal record? Are we a welcoming city for them? Probably not, quite honestly. All right. So, anyways, so I have my issues with things like that. But so that was one of the items that came up. Oh, and of course, by the way, during public comment on that, at least one person took a shot at me personally. So, hey, thank you very much. I love you too, DSA. There was the first opening during the regular council meeting, though. The first item of business was really just a quick rundown from the city manager, and not just the city manager, but other staff people as well, about what the possibilities are because of the current federal, presidential administration in terms of federal funding. I happen to think this is a big deal. You know, Cambridge, we may be, as Mike Capuano used to say, we got more money than God, right? But the fact is Cambridge is dependent on federal grants, just like every other city is. We've actually been pretty expert in applying for grants, and to cover some of our housing initiatives, some of the programs within the Department of Human Services programs, the Cambridge schools. I think the manager mentioned, I forget, I wrote it down somewhere here, but maybe on the order of about 23 million bucks that come in through federal grants. And if those were to just wash away, then you either cut programs or you have to dip into our excess levy capacity and start taxing people more to cover them. But there are other things coming down the pike here. We've already were aware, even before the current administration came in, that the money wasn't growing on trees in Cambridge, and we were going to have to start being a little bit more austere in terms of uh, some of our big capital projects. So if we start losing big bucks from federal money, that can have a big effect. And it's not just city government and city programs. I mean, Harvard University and MIT are probably two of the biggest recipients of federal grant money for things like national, NIH grants having to do with research. And, that covers the cost, covers some of the stipends for graduate students, um, professors, and whatever. And let's not forget, Harvard University is not only my employer, but it's the largest employer in the city. And if the drying up of some federal money, because they decided to target the universities here for good or bad reasons, that has a ripple effect in terms of just people who live here and work here and pay rent here or own homes here. I mean, they still got to pay your mortgage, still got to pay your rent. So if federal cutbacks actually start jeopardizing that, then you're going to see other ripple effects. So I think the manager did a very, very good job of laying out some of those realities. But he also pointed out, that some of these things that are coming out of the current administration are being challenged in court. And he gave some examples of how those legal challenges can actually stall some of the implementation of some of these cuts. Could go on for 4 years, quite honestly. So anyway, there's a lot of unknowns, and we'll just have to see how it goes. I mean, personally, I hope they don't make a decision that we have to make up every dollar that's cut back from the federal government by just jacking up taxes on everybody in the city. I don't think that would be fair either. So, but we'll just have to see where this goes, right? So that was one of the other items that was before us. Um, there were a number of housing related city council orders that came up at the meeting last night. And again, I'm only watching it after the fact, so it wasn't like I was there live. But some of them are, and you've seen actually some of these things elsewhere, like in the city of Boston. One of them is there's a move with the state legislature as well as at the municipal level to say that broker fees. So when you have an apartment to rent, or you get a broker or whatever, and then you pass on any fees to the tenant. So oftentimes, and it's sort of a scary thing for me to think about, the tenant, a new tenant, sometimes is asked to pay the upfront first month's rent, last month's rent, and a broker's fee, which is usually a month's rent. So you're supposed to pay already. The rents are ridiculously high in Cambridge, and you're supposed to do what upfront 3 times that. I mean, you're basically being asked to just put $10,000 on the barrel in some cases, which I think is crazy. Now I'm going to speak, on my behalf, having been a landlord since for 40 years. This will be my 40th year of being a landlord. I have never charged a broker fee. I have never asked for anything more than the first month's rent. I've never asked for last month's rent. And I, I don't even ask for security deposits, though I can certainly appreciate why landlords would do so. But I figure if somebody's going to screw you, they're going to screw you anyway. And if you think that the fact that you got a security deposit and you can somehow, keep a few bucks here because of the person who just screwed you, that, you think you're going to take them to court and win out that way, that's not going to happen. So you just basically just be nice to your tenants, trust people, trust your landlord, trust your landlords should trust your tenants. One of the things I really deeply dislike a lot of these pro-tenant legislation is that what they're really doing is they're just trying to build walls between landlords and tenants so that they're all supposed to, you are hereby required to hate each other. I think in Cambridge now, landlords are supposed to hand out a big brochure of your rights as a tenant, so they can say, here's a 15 ways you can screw me, right? Uh, so anyway, now this city council order wanted to say, okay, the broker's fees, landlords cannot pass them along to tenants. Well, I mean, it's just a proposal right now. It's not a law. But think about it. If you were sort of just a landlord who just wanted to get your rents in, and they said you can't pass along that large-ish fee, you're just going to roll it into the rents. Why? How could you not, right? And then so that in the end, unless the tenant's going to be very short term, ultimately the tenant ends up paying even more as a result of the fact that the landlord was required to eat that fee, and then just basically jacked up your rent as payback for that. Um, there was another order I don't really fully understand calling for, and I think this is part of some state legislation right now about forbidding certain what they call junk fees. I mean, I never asked for anything like this myself, but if you sort of say, well, if you're going to live here, then there's a cleaning fee, there's a key fee, there's a certainly the big one in Cambridge is if they happen to have a parking facility, you have to pay for the parking, and many a tenant will say, I'm already paying too much for the rent, so why should I pay for the parking? I'll just get my residential permit and park on the street. And a lot of people do that. So it kind of defeats the whole idea of having the parking garages. And I don't know, now that they've eliminated the requirement to even have parking on premises, how that'll actually play out in the long run. I really don't know. And I believe again, I haven't listened through the whole tape, so I don't know whether these things were passed or whether they were made subject to the charter right, and we'll have to see them again. I believe one thing that was made subject to the charter right was another proposal, which was something that grew out of the recently passed multifamily housing petition. So as many people have pointed out, that if you can now build bigger, taller, denser, why not just build instead of building a 4-family home or a 6-family home with inclusionary units? Honestly, I don't know why anybody would even consider doing that. Why not just build a 2-family with palatial units, or a single family with 6,000 square feet, right? I mean, now that you can have more height and density, you can do that, right? I said, well, counselors, you should have thought of that before, So anyway, so after the fact, they're coming in now with an order saying we're going to proposal to limit the unit size to no more than 2,000 square feet, which is, kind of a liberal amount here. But it seems to me that this is just clearly and blatantly illegal. You can't tell a property owner, I mean, yes, you can tell them how much your buildable potential is, or is not. You can tell them what setbacks you're required to have. Certainly, the inspectional service can tell what your requirements are in order to meet certain fire codes. So you can certainly infringe on what a property owner can do, but you can't tell them the color of the paint they got to paint their living rooms, or how many bathrooms you're allowed to have in the car. I suppose you can require them to have a minimum number, right? Like one, right? But when you start going down that road, I think you're just clearly you just jumped way across the line of what's legal. And I believe Heather Hoffman during public comment took them a little bit to school about this fact. And I believe it was Counselor Toner, um, at least I heard it in some other source that may have exercised his charter right on this one, because he already received some legal advice that this just wasn't even legal, you know. But it's all about control, isn't it? It's you know we're gonna I think there's some city councilors, especially of the DSA variety, who, if they could prescribe every single thing about what you are allowed to do, who you're allowed to rent to, and at what rates, what rents you're allowed to have, they would prescribe everything right down to the color of the paint in the living room, you know? And so you're just seeing some more examples of that playing itself out. Anyway, so enough on that. Um, I'll tell you one thing that was actually kind of interesting to me, and I think I'm going to actually switch back a little bit here over to uh, highlight this. All right. So there was a city council order. I think it was order number 13. Says the city manager is requested to work with relevant departments to create a plaque to be placed at the entrance of or inside City Hall that demonstrates the values that the Cambridge City Council upholds of the separation of church and state and gender equality. So that came from Councilors Nolan, Siddiqui, and Wilson. And I think what triggered that is the inscription from Frederick Hastings Rindge, whose generosity is the reason why we even have this Cambridge City Hall, where the inscription says, God has given commandments unto men. From these commandments, men have framed laws by which to be governed. It is honorable and praiseworthy to serve the people by administering these laws faithfully. If the laws are not enforced, the people are not well governed. Now, please highlight the words God and men. All right. Now, I just want to point out that for quite a few years, until they did the renovations of the city hall recently, there was a Black Lives Matter thing draped directly over that inscription, which I thought there's a bit of a subtle message being sent there, isn't there? When you're sort of saying, putting that right over something that happens to have something about enforcing laws, right? I don't know if that was intentional or unintentional, but it just seemed to be rather a curious message being sent. So anyway, the counselors in this order, apparently, not surprisingly, Patty Nolan objects to the use of the word God anywhere. And by the way, I'm an atheist. So, but my notion of atheism is that I'm not going to take a dollar bill or a quarter that says "In God We Trust" and refuse to spend the money because it happens to have the word God on it, right? It's in a building that was dedicated in 1889. The use of some religious references at that time is thoroughly consistent with the period of time. The fact that these were laws written by men, well, again, they didn't have to be written by men. They could be men and women, of course. But the thing is that you know, standard practice back in 1889 is men sort of was all encompassing, for men and women. So they want to have I mean, thankfully they're not calling for covering up the inscription, which wouldn't, quite honestly, would not have shocked me if at least one counselor called for doing that. But they do want to have some sort of a plaque or something inside giving an explanation. And I hope it's not some little mealy mouth thing, just pandering to these city councilors. I like, giving some background on that inscription. There's other similar sort of referential inscription within the main Cambridge Library, the old portion of the main library as well. Also, which was also donated thanks to the generosity of Frederick Hastings Rindge. So are we to obliterate any of these statements from Frederick Hastings Rindge simply because we don't like the language which was in use at that day? So I find these. I mean, again, any plaque that gives historical context is something I'm going to be happy about. All right, so let them do that. But I just sort of find it funny the battles that some city councilors choose. You really is that the most important thing you could be doing with your time right now? So anyway, the last thing I want to say, if I've sort of gotten through my Paul Harvey list here, page two, is just to sort of wrap things up here today, talk a little bit about the Cambridge Charter, which I've been doing a lot, you know. So we had meetings on, I think it was December 3rd, there was January 27th, February 13th, February 24th of this special committee of the whole, which was appointed pursuant to the recommendations from the Charter Review Committee, when the city council then mayor appointed this committee of the whole, which is all 9 councilors, chaired by councilors Toner and Siddiqui, right? And they've had these meetings here, which I love Paul Toner to death, but I don't like how these things are structured at all. Basically, they said, okay, what are the sort of greatest hits of big things we have to decide up front? So they took a bunch of votes on December 3rd. Things, and I guess I agree with some of these, like like to get rid of, do you want to go with a strong mayor form of government versus a city manager form of government? The Charter Review Committee was pretty evenly split on that matter. So, and they needed 2/3 support to support something. So they said, no, let's not do that. Now, the Charter Review Committee also overwhelmingly wanted to have things like 16, 17-year-old voting, non-citizen voting, non-citizens could run and serve on city council. I don't like, they could have even year elections. They seem to love all those ideas. I thought those are terrible ideas. And furthermore, and I think the leadership on the special committee understood all too well that if those were included in a package that went to the State House for as a home rule petition to change our charter, if those were included there, that it'd probably be sent to the committee for third reading in order to die a slow death, right? So I think there was some intentionality here to not include poison pills, you know. And I dare say that's how it or has worked out. So they did back in December. They decided let's stick with the city manager form of government. At least one or two councilors didn't agree. There was a proposal to have a direct election of the mayor. Well, that actually was the most recent meeting. They sort of were batting that around. It has been terribly misreported in some of our pseudo papers of record that somehow the council is in favor of having a directly elected mayor. That's not true. What they agreed was they would not put it into the charter, but maybe modify the rules, council rules, to establish protocols and standards for how they would choose a mayor, which may or may not involve the use of information from the ballots that elected the city council. For example, if the person who got the most #1 votes, should they be, and hasn't served yet as mayor, should they be the mayor? Terrible idea. But at least 1 or 2 city councilors seem to like that idea, probably because they get a lot of #1 votes. Would you do an instant runoff with the city council ballots in order to, after you've elected the council, you eliminate all non-elected people and then you just whittle it down to elect one, right? Seems like a nice idea. I don't think it's a very good idea at all, because when people are voting for a city councilor, they're not voting for a mayor. So you're using balloting in a voting procedure that was used for one purpose for an entirely different purpose. That violates every principle of election systems. So, and the city solicitor, bless her heart, really laid that out with the assistance of the folks from the Cambridge Election Commission, right? Why that was just wrongheaded. But again, they seem to be locked into this awkwardness about the bad feelings of having to take a hard vote on who's going to be mayor. Tough, my feeling about it. Tough, live with it, right? It's not the first tough vote you're going to take. And if it is, it's certainly not the last. So get used to it. There were other proposals. I won't go through them all, but certainly the general reformatting of the charter from the Plan E charter, which dates to 1940, to putting more of a modern structure. Everybody seemed to agree with that, including me. Um, one of the things I've been screaming at for a long, long time is to allow a little bit more flexibility for the election commission choosing how to conduct the PR elections, so that we can finally get rid of the dependence on the order in which the ballots are counted. It's not a big effect, but it is an embarrassing effect on the way we do things now. And we're currently limited to methods that were in use in 1938, and that just doesn't cut it. So everybody seems to be thinking that's okay. There was a proposal to have what they call resident assemblies that was voted down broadly. I agreed with voting that down because, again, not to explain right now what resident assemblies were, but I thought it was a much too complicated, artificial thing. It really didn't belong in the charter. They wanted to have 4-year terms for council. That was proposed, 4-year terms versus 2-year terms. Thankfully, the election commission and the city solicitor made it really clear extremely how problematic that would be in terms of mayoral elections, a complete change in the way proportional representation worked. So we're going to stick with our 2-year terms. Some wanted to have line item vetoes and the ability for city council to basically wipe away 10% of the budget of any city department. Originally, we were going to be even more, I believe, and reallocate it to other departments. And that was explained to them how disastrously wrongheaded that idea is. But if you're a control freak disguised as a city councilor, you're going to still want to do that. And there are at least 2 city councilors who fit into that category quite comfortably. One of the things that I made a big deal about was that in the Charter Review Committee's recommendations, they wanted to include sections on initiative petitions and what they call group petitions, basically a citizen petition processes. Okay, and in the December meeting, I think it was the December meeting, the councilors just said nope, away it goes, because they were living under the belief that it was already covered in state law. What they didn't realize, because they don't read very carefully, is that the section of the state law in which those provisions exist is chapter 43, which covers the plan governments, plan A, B, C, D, E, F, right? And so we have it now because we're a planning government. If you move away to a brand new charter, which is done under a completely different section of chapter 43, then that provision doesn't apply to you. So you have to put it in your charter. Now, there's still some people going back under the belief that, oh, well, it's something it's maybe a good idea to do it. No, you really do have to do it. And I think it's also a good idea to have that explicitly laid out in your charter, because maybe down the road you want to modify it. Now you have the ability to do it. You don't have to amend state law to modify it. So I think it would be a very good thing to have that in there. So hopefully they'll figure it out. One of the things that I pointed out was that there's a very, very harsh penalty associated with interference with the city manager. It's never been enforced anywhere in the state, but if you blow past the manager and start browbeating a department head or demanding that they hire your cousin Vinny to work in the city government, give him a job, that's a violation. That's a felony with a penalty of imprisonment, potentially a large fine, and prohibition from serving in that office. That was all the penalties were quietly removed by the Collins Center. I talked to a member of the Charter Review Committee. They never even discussed it. Yet the Collins Center, which was consulting with them, they just put that in. Anyway, council, you think they were going to actually impose penalties? You think they're going to change that wording to put those penalties back in? Ain't going to happen. That's one of the biggest flaws with this whole process, is that ultimately it shouldn't be the city councilors who are having absolute final say as to what's going to go to the voters, because the voters, as long as it's on balance a reasonable package, they're going to vote for it, right? So having the city council be the deciding voice on how they're going to be governed is a little bit like Enron going into the president's office and writing the rules on how corporations should be governed. It was not really the best way to do business. There are a few other things, again, running a little out of time, I'll just mention here. In my view, there are other parts of government, like our relationship with the Cambridge Housing Authority, the special acts that have established the Cambridge Election Commission, Traffic Board, etc. Those ought to be at least referenced in the city charter. hopefully we'll actually see a copy of the final draft one of these days, which we haven't really seen yet. So anyway, that's it for tonight. See you later.